Photography wasn't always itself. I mean, for its first century, it actually suffered from this massive identity
Oh,
crisis.
totally. A huge one.
Yeah, it was like an insecure teenager, right? Trying on their dad's oversized suits, absolutely desperate to be taken seriously by the adults in the room.
And the adults in the room at that time were, of course, the classic painters.
Exactly. It took a single, honestly kind of stolen photograph of a blind woman on the streets of New York to finally force the camera to strip off that disguise, to show its true mechanical face.
It's a pretty brutal moment in art history, honestly.
It really is. So welcome to this deep dive, where we are pulling from a really fascinating article and discussion explored on SanalSergi. Our mission today isn't to walk you through some dry historical biography.
Right, no boring timelines today.
No timelines. We are going to explore the exact, deeply uncomfortable moment photography stopped pretending to be a painting and finally became a modern visual language.
And that identity crisis you just mentioned, that's really the perfect place to start because, we look back today and assume a camera was always just understood as a camera.
Right. You just point and shoot.
Exactly. But in the late 1800s and early 1900s, classical painting held absolute visual authority. Museums, galleries, critics, they all spoke the language of the canvas.
So where did that leave the camera?
Well, photography was basically viewed by the art establishment as a cold, soulless, industrial parlor trick. Just a machine pressing a button.
So instead of leaning into what makes the camera unique, like its unprecedented ability to freeze a fraction of a second or to capture raw, mechanical reality, early photographers got deeply insecure.
Oh, incredibly insecure.
Reading through the SanalSergi sources, that teenager analogy just kept coming back to me. Except it wasn't just wearing an oversized suit. It was like a teenager wearing a terrible fake mustache.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. These photographers were part of a movement called pictorialism. And they were literally, this is wild to me, literally smearing Vaseline on their expensive glass lenses just to ruin the focus.
They were doing anything they could to hide the machine. They would scratch up their negatives with the needles in the darkroom.
Right, really? Needles?
Yeah. They used complex chemical printing processes just to add visible physical brush strokes to the paper. They set up these incredibly fake, overly dramatic lighting setups with actors in classical costumes.
They were actively destroying the very clarity the machine was built to achieve.
Exactly.
And all of that was just to give the photograph the soft, hazy, romantic blur of like an impressionist painting.
Yeah, they were trying to manufacture a soul for a machine by hiding its true nature. They figured if a photograph looked like a charcoal sketch or an oil painting, well, maybe the art world would finally grant them some legitimacy.
Wow.
It was an entire medium built on a fundamental deception about what it was.
It's a fascinating kind of self-loathing for a medium, isn't it? Twisting the image away from what it actually is, just to fit into a preconceived notion of what real art should be.
It's a major inferiority complex.
But any false identity built on that much manipulation eventually has to crack.
Oh, and it did. That crack happened in the 1910s, and the catalyst was a young photographer named Paul Strand.
The guy who changed everything.
He really did. Strand didn't just invent a new aesthetic trend to replace pictorialism. He initiated what philosophers would call an ontological break.
Okay, hold on. Ontological break, that is a very heavy philosophical term. What do you actually mean by that in, plain English?
Fair question. So ontology is simply the study of what something fundamentally is, its very nature of existence.
Yeah.
Before Strand, the being of a photograph was entirely tied up in imitating other art forms. An ontological break means Strand didn't just change the style of photography, he changed the fundamental definition of what photography was.
Ah, I see.
He ripped that oversized suit off the medium and forced it to look at its bare mechanical reality.
He let the machine be a machine.
Precisely. He proved that a photograph didn't need to look like a painting to be valuable. It could just be a photograph.
Right.
And to understand how radical that shift was, we really have to look at the work itself. We have to see how Strand completely dismantled the hazy romanticism of the era and replaced it with something sharp, unforgiving, and deeply modern.
Let's set the scene for that then. I want you to imagine New York City in 1915. This is a really crucial historical moment.
Everything is shifting.
Yeah, rapid industrialization is completely transforming the skyline. The First World War is looming over everything. The world's becoming mechanized, massive, and honestly, a little terrifying.
Very terrifying for a lot of people.
And you're looking at one of Strand's most famous images from this exact moment. titled Wall Street.
When you first look at this photograph, your brain immediately registers a harsh truth.
Which is?
The soft, romantic blur of pictorialism is completely dead.
Compl
Instead, the right side of the frame is entirely dominated by the giant, dark, vertical windows of the newly built J.P. Morgan building. And they don't look like glass.
No, they don't.
They look like massive black voids cut into the cold stone by a razor-sharp morning light.
The contrast is unbelievable. The shadows falling across the stone ground are these incredibly long, sharp, aggressive blades of darkness.
It's very intense.
They almost look like prison bars stretching across the sidewalk. And then, way down at the very bottom of the frame, you finally notice the people.
Right.
But here's what confuses me. If this image is supposed to be the dramatic birth of modern photography, where is the action? Nothing is happening. There's no dramatic event, just these tiny, faceless people walking to work in suits and hats.
Well, that lack of dramatic action is the actual revelation.
How so?
Think about the early 1900s mindset. At that time, artists and futurists thought modernity was all about speed. They were obsessed with trains, automobiles, airplanes, the blur of motion.
Oh, right. The whole faster is better thing.
Exactly. But Strand stands there with his bulky camera and shows us that the core of the modern world isn't about speed at all. It's about scale.
That makes total sense. He's showing us that the modern world is just too big for us.
Look at the structural hierarchy of the image. For centuries, classical art made the human figure the hero of the narrative. Even in vast landscapes, the human element was central.
Yeah, the human was always the focal point.
But in Wall Street, the humans are reduced to directionless silhouettes. They look like insignificant ants caught at the bottom of a concrete canyon. The photograph refuses to tell a neat little story about these individuals.
Because the individuals don't matter to the system, the architecture itself is the subject.
Exactly. The architecture represents a massive, oppressive system of financial capitalism. The people are just an insignificant, replaceable detail at the bottom of the machine.
Wow.
Strand isn't using perspective to give you a beautiful, three-dimensional view of a bustling city street. He is using perspective to visually crush the human figures under the sheer weight of these giant black windows.
He's arguing that modern reality isn't a pretty aesthetic surface you can paint. It's a cold, structural order.
It's literally a power diagram. It isn't trying to make the world look beautiful or heroic. It's showing the world exactly as it is, with all its harsh, unyielding geometry.
But you know, if Strand's camera is a machine that crushes humanity under architecture when he zooms out,
Yeah.
I have to wonder what happens when that cold, mechanical eye is forced to look a single human in the face.
Well, a year later, in 1916, Strand does exactly that. He takes all that brutal, mechanical sharpness and focuses it on a single individual in an image simply called Blind Woman.
If Wall Street is structurally oppressive, Blind Woman is suffocatingly claustrophobic.
It really is hard to look at.
Let's describe this for anyone who hasn't seen it. A woman is framed dead center. There's absolutely no background, no street, no sky, no context to give you breathing room.
Nothing to anchor her to a place.
Right. Everything is pushed violently up to the surface of the image. And hanging right around her neck is a harsh metal sign that reads, "Blind," in massive, unforgiving, hand-painted letters.
And this is where the tension of the image becomes almost unbearable. We, as the viewers, are staring at her with microscopic mechanical sharpness.
Yeah, the lens captures every single asymmetrical detail of her face. You can see the rough, fibrous texture of her cheap, dark clothing.
You can practically feel the physical thickness of the white paint sitting on the surface of that metal sign.
We can see all of that physical reality perfectly. But because she is blind, and because her eyes are obscured, one wanders off center, the other's hidden behind a dark lens reflecting the sunlight, we cannot access her inner world at all.
We are entirely locked out.
The camera captures the surface with terrifying perfection, but it remains completely blind to her soul.
Which highlights the profound irony of the photographic act. You are staring at a woman who cannot see you, and despite seeing every agonizing physical detail of her existence, you have absolutely no idea who she actually is.
Visibility, Strand is telling us, does not equal empathy.
Exactly.
I need to push back hard here, though. Let's talk about the reality of how this image was made, because it is deeply unsettling.
It's incredibly controversial.
Yeah. He didn't just walk up and ask for her portrait. He used a specially modified camera. He mounted a fake, gleaming brass dummy lens on the front of his camera, pointing straight ahead.
Right, as a decoy.
And the real working lens was hidden on the side, tucked under his arm. So he would stand next to someone, looking straight ahead at a building or a park, pretending to photograph the scenery while actually snapping a highly detailed, intimate portrait of the person standing beside him.
It's a huge invasion of privacy.
She had no idea she was being photographed. He stole her image. How can he claim to be finding some fundamental visual truth when his entire method is built on deception?
It is an incredible ethical violation by today's standards, and your discomfort is entirely justified. But that discomfort is not a flaw in Strand's work. It is the entire point of the exercise.
The deception was the point.
By taking the photo this way and then presenting it so harshly, he deliberately shatters the myth of the camera's innocence.
You mean the idea that a photographer is just a neutral fly on the wall?
Exactly. For decades, photographers desperately wanted to believe they were just neutral observers, that the camera was a harmless window capturing objective reality.
Right.
Strand puts this blind woman in the frame, steals her image through mechanical deception, and forces the viewer to sit with the realization that the act of photographing someone is a hostile intervention. It's an assertion of power.
The person with the machine holds all the power.
Yeah.
The subject is entirely vulnerable.
He proves that the camera is not a harmless tool. It is an instrument that can exploit, isolate, and dominate just as easily as it can document. He forces the viewer into the uncomfortable position of the voyeur.
Okay, that changes everything. Because if the camera has this inherent power dynamic, and the method itself is deceptive, that makes me question this entire concept of street photography that Strand was championing.
It's a massive contradiction.
Yeah, his whole pitch was, look, I'm not smearing Vaseline on the lens anymore. I'm not manipulating the negative in the darkroom. I'm just pointing the camera and shooting the straight, unvarnished truth.
But is it the truth?
Exactly. If he has the power to steal an image, strip a woman of all her context, and force us to look at her like a specimen, is he actually being neutral?
That is the ultimate question of the modern era, and the answer is a resounding no. If we connect this back to the broader themes explored in the SanalSergi article, street photography is actually the most refined, sophisticated illusion of all.
Explain the mechanics of that illusion. How can completely unmanipulated photograph be an illusion?
Because while the chemical process of the camera itself doesn't lie, the act of framing is an act of total, absolute manipulation. When Strand stopped using darkroom tricks, the manipulation didn't disappear.
It just moved.
Right. It migrated from the darkroom to the viewfinder.
So it becomes entirely about what you choose to cut out of the world.
Yeah.
Every time you frame a shot, you are drawing a border, you are playing God.
You decide what exists in your universe and what gets banished into non-existence outside the frame.
Let's look at another 1916 image of his to really nail this down. It's called Porch Shadows.
Oh, this one is brilliant.
You hear a title like Porch Shadows, and you immediately expect a nice, relaxing, wide shot of a summer porch, maybe a rocking chair, some lemonade.
The very standard pictorialist subject.
But when you look at the actual image, he has cut the frame so incredibly tight that the porch literally ceases to exist as a physical, recognizable place.
It's no longer a location. It becomes a pure, abstract, geometric relationship between sharp diagonal lines and stark black shadows.
The wooden railing, the floorboards, they lose their function as objects you interact with. They are reduced to a grid.
He does the exact same thing with another photograph from that year simply called Bowl.
Oh, I remember looking at that one.
It's a perfectly ordinary, mundane ceramic kitchen bowl.
Yeah.
But he photographs it from such a harsh, tight overhead angle that it loses all of its functional identity.
Right, it's no longer a bowl you can pour soup into. It is just a pristine, abstract curve of light and dark.
He removes the table, he removes the kitchen, he removes any trace of humanity.
And by stripping away all that context, he completely alters reality without ever faking a single element in a darkroom.
He doesn't add anything fake, but he subtracts the context that makes the object human. And this brings us to the core conceptual breakthrough of the era, machine vision.
Machine vision. The idea that the camera doesn't see the world the way our eyes do.
Because our eyes are connected to our brains, and our brains are full of emotions, memories, and biases.
A human looks at a porch and feels nostalgia. A human looks at a bowl and thinks of hunger or home.
But the machine, the physical camera, does not care about human emotion. It doesn't know what a bowl is used for. The machine only understands three things: light, geometry, and structure.
So instead of fighting the machine by making it act like a painter, Strand finally embraced how the machine naturally sees.
He realized that if you let the camera be ruthless, if you let it see the raw structural architecture of reality, you uncover a hidden order to the world that the emotional human eye is usually too distracted to notice.
It's brilliant, But as we've seen, it's also incredibly cold. It removes the human warmth from the equation entirely.
It does.
Looking at the SanalSergi timeline, it's wild to see how this cold structural machine vision didn't just die as an obscure artistic experiment with Strand. I mean, you can draw a direct, undeniable line from his work straight through the 20th century.
It fundamentally shaped how we document history.
The lineage is incredibly clear once you know what to look for, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The SanalSergi article traces it beautifully. You start with someone like Alfred Stieglitz, who was the bridge.
Right. He was the one fighting to get photography recognized as a fine art in the early days.
But Strand was the absolute starting point of modernism. He drew the line in the sand.
And then, jumping forward, you see Strand's influence explode in the 1930s with someone like Walker Evans. He was photographing the Great Depression in America.
Think of his iconic 1936 photo, Alabama cotton tenant farmer wife.
Yes. Evans took Strand's razor-sharp, unmanipulated geometric approach and applied it directly to agonizing social reality.
He didn't use soft focus to romanticize the poverty. He looked at poverty with structural coldness.
Just the sharp, unyielding reality of the woman's weathered face, framed against the rigid, geometric wooden boards of her shack.
He used the cold structure of machine vision to expose the cruelty of the social system.
And it doesn't even stop there. The deep dive on SanalSergi traces this aesthetic evolution all the way into the modern digital age. They specifically highlight Andreas Gursky and his famous 1999 photograph, Ryan II.
Which, by the way, is one of the most expensive photographs ever sold.
And it's literally just a picture of a river.
It is a river, but it's machine vision taken to its absolute terrifying digital extreme. Gursky took this landscape and digitally erased all the messy, unpredictable human elements.
He removed the factory buildings on the horizon. He erased the people walking their dogs.
What you are left with is nature itself, beaten into submission and organized into massive, oppressive, horizontal geometric bands.
A band of green grass, a band of gray concrete path, a band of silver river, a band of gray sky.
It Strand's cold, structural view of reality, but elevated to the scale of a massive, globalized, modern system.
It is the ultimate endpoint of the journey Strand started. From Stieglitz to Strand, from Evans to Gursky.
Once Strand taught the camera how to see like a machine, we never went back. We just kept building bigger, colder machines.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on today. We spent this entire time talking about how straight photography, with its perfect mechanical sharpness, its absolute geometry, and its rigid framing, presents itself as the ultimate objective truth of the world.
But the truth is always curated.
Exactly. Is this kind of photography actually deeply authoritarian? Think about it. By freezing the world into one perfectly sharp, unchangeable angle, cutting out all the surrounding context, the photographer is forcing you to see the world exactly as they dictate.
There is absolutely no room for your own interpretation.
The rigid frame commands you. This is the only reality that matters, and everything outside this box does not exist.
That raises a crucial question for our own daily lives, because we aren't just looking at Paul Strand or Andreas Gursky prints in a quiet museum anymore.
No, we aren't.
We are all carrying this exact technology in our pockets every single second of the day.
Yes, and taking that a step further for you, the listener, to chew on, if the camera is an extension of our minds that dictates a single, rigid way of seeing, well, how is the smartphone camera currently in your pocket restricting how you experience your own life right now?
That is a terrifying thought.
Every time you crop a photo for social media, every time you frame out the messy room to just show the perfect cup of coffee, are you documenting your life, or are you aggressively manipulating your own reality into an authoritarian frame?
You are practicing machine vision on your own memories. You're cutting out the vital, messy context of your life just to create a pure, idealized geometric form.
It's a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying realization.
It really is. I don't think I will ever look at my photo roll the same way again.
Me neither. Well, this episode is part of the SanalSergi Photography History podcast series. If you want to see the crushing, oppressive shadows of Wall Street, the suffocating tension of Blind Woman, or the profound geometry of that simple ceramic bowl for yourself, you can read more on SanalSergi.com, where all of these incredible visual transformations are beautifully broken down.
Seeing these images with these concepts in mind completely changes how you experience them.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey today. Next time you pull out your phone to snap a picture, take a second to ask yourself, what are you purposely leaving outside the frame? We'll see you on the next deep dive.